to review our stories. What I thought was the top story for the week was about GM's Cruise, and they are starting now to take paid fares for driverless taxis in San Francisco. It's just a pilot operation, but I think it is the beginning of a substantial change in city life, first in San Francisco, then throughout America and Europe and the world. So it's just the beginning of one of the major changes. The next story is of one large but not peer-reviewed study that says COVID outcomes get worse with each successive infection. And I think that's not a good story, particularly with succeeding variants becoming more infectious and resisting protections that your body built up before. The technology story is about AI, and the Google insider who's been making all the noise recently held another interview in which he said the company's AI could escape control and do bad things. So that's kind of ominous. And in the environment, a careful analysis was done of China, because China, to be able to meet their environmental goals, have to increase their wind and solar power over the coming years by a factor of 10. And they did a careful analysis to see, can China do this? And they determined that their practical potential is 9 times that which is needed for carbon neutrality. It makes me wonder, if China has this much potential, maybe they could be an exporter of green power in Asia. That would be a lot different way for China to base their economy. And in flight, there is another new company, Zero Avia, and they're going to be testing their hydrogen power plane over this summer. And so that gives us a different green alternative for flying. In biology, it turns out the octopus brain and the human brain share the same kind of not fully understood genetic characteristic called jumping genes. And I will talk more about that within the article. But so the human brain and the octopus brain share some important features, even though we're not very related to the octopuses. And in anthropology, then in a tiny village in Western Jalisco, they have been exploring an enormous prehistoric palace that was built there about AD 400. It is nearly the size of the Grand Palace in Mexico City, so it's not a small building. And then The final story is a study that links flu vaccinations to a 40% reduction in Alzheimer's disease. So I think that's going to be uh, a yet another reason to keep current on your flu shots. And okay, so to go on then with the story, to the first story is about GM and its subsidiary Cruise. They're starting paid service in San Francisco. Here, let me show you what their car looks like. There it is. It looks like a normal kind of sedan until you look on the top and you see all of that stuff on the top of the car. That's not a normal car. And though it's not clear, I guess in the photograph, it looks like there's a driver. Uh, the ones that they're using in San Francisco now uh, doesn't have that driver in it. And so Cruise has been operating a free driverless taxi service in San Francisco since earlier this year. And last week, it began charging for the service. Both Cruise and its rival Waymo, which is a division of Google's parent Alphabet, they have both been exploring San Francisco and both want to start charging for autonomous taxi rides soon. Uh, the Cruise program is still quite limited, only covering a third of San Francisco with 30 cars and only operating at night between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. They're operating during this time during the pilot rollout, really because there are fewer pedestrians and other cars on the road, making for simpler driving situations while they're testing out their autonomous vehicles. Some of the people who have been taking them, when they start, they have some hesitance about riding in a car with no driver. But after a while, they come to like the idea of having their own space and not having to share it with a stranger. Uh, the they're only operating, San Francisco is a small city, so I think it's a good place for this experiment. And uh, they're only doing it in about a third of the city in the northwest corner, which is the least complex portion of San Francisco that's mostly residential areas in a grid of low speed streets. Uh, Cruise still operates unfair driverless rides in the rest of the city for some small group of users, but they want to expand rides throughout the city quickly. And their plans are by the end of the year to be covering all of San Francisco and to have hundreds of vehicles. And Cruise says that the ride should be cheaper than taxis with drivers because you don't have to pay the driver. And so far, it's about 10% cheaper than things like Uber, but they say the cost will eventually drop far below the cost of ride hailing systems. The one comment, he said the experience of riding in this the GM AI, he said, was more reassuring than what he had experienced in Tesla's full self-driving mode, which still has some kind of funky issues with phantom braking and other weird decisions. But in the long term, to fight climate change, we still should be looking towards a less car dependent public transportation in the system. But it looks like these driverless taxis are coming. And one effect of them is they're going to put drivers out of a job and channel the money that used to go to taxi drivers, and now it will go to the owners of the driverless cars. Tesla had planned for its owners to put up their Teslas as robo taxis. They have to get their full self-driving mode ironed out before they can do that. So maybe the money would go to individual Tesla owners. More likely the money will go to what you see being tried in San Francisco, a large company operating a fleet of these driverless taxis. So one of the things that excites me about the idea of the driverless taxi is, with it, if you live in a city in an area that has that coverage, why in the world would you ever own a car? When you can just call it up and have it be there and take care of you in privacy and comfort. So how about you guys? Are you ready for your driverless taxis?
I think one of the problems could be that the taxi drivers might try to sabotage them and create accidents so that people do not want to ride.
I think you could be right, Johannes.
The most significant autonomous development is the increasing use of autonomous tractor trailers on the interstate highway system. That is much easier done and much more effective than driverless taxis. Your point about having a car, Columbia University said if ride hailing became the standard, then the streets wouldn't need to be parking lots.
Yes.
Because people park on the street now, which ties up normal traffic.
Yes.
If people don't have their own cars, then they don't need to park them on the street.
Yeah, that's very good information. I hadn't realized that, but you're right.
I understand that test vehicles, trucks, driverless are already on the road, already in our freeways.
Yes.
On test runs all over the country. We don't know about this because they're not marked, but it's interesting that it is that progressing that well.
Yes, and with these drivers, they're mainly kind of depot to depot truck runs, so they're simple routes and they're all identified and well known. And so that makes it easy. The other detail is, I guess there's like about 1 million of these long haul truck drivers. And I think their jobs are in substantial jeopardy.
The US government just recently allowed the Scandinavian truck manufacturer to deliver autonomous trucks that don't even have a cab. No provision for a driver.
Oh, right. Why would you need a cab? I hadn't thought of that too. That's right.
So far as the truck drivers' jobs disappearing, the dilemma is that I believe in the US, they lowered the age for truck drivers to 18 because there simply isn't enough. The boomers are all retiring, and driving truck used to be a pretty good job, but unfortunately with GPS and monitoring the truck drivers, it's turned into a far less attractive job. And companies are having difficulty recruiting truck drivers. So it may be that nobody wants that job anymore.
Mhm.
That in the United States is part of the supply chain problem, is there aren't enough truck drivers. And it's a miserable job. In the US, a truck driver can only drive for 14 hours a day, and then mid-trip has to stay someplace for 10 hours in the middle of no place.
Well, and the other problem for them is that they only get paid when the wheels are rolling. So you pull up to a depot and there aren't enough people to unload your load, and you're sitting there for 2 hours, 4 hours, and you're not getting paid for it.
Wow.
The working conditions have really deteriorated for truck drivers. And now, as I said, with remote GPS, they're far more monitored than they used to be.
So it's not the freedom on the road like it used to be.
No, but the autonomous interstate trucks will change things dramatically, and they're already on the road. They're already carrying cargo. But the problem isn't just the US. We see the same problem in the UK. They're short
Yes.
long distance drivers.
Mhm. It's just in the UK, they don't have as long a long distance for the long distance drivers.
As a resident of California, I feel obligated to point out that San Francisco is not a small city. It might be small in square miles, but it's the fourth largest city in California with about 1 million people.
Right. But it's still only 7 by 7 miles, so it's only about 20 square miles.
And that's why I think it was picked for this experiment.
I think you're right. And, you know, with all the people in the small area, there's a good density of people, which means lots of people to take rides.
Although they have this experiment located in more of a residential area, but
Right.
they
I
don't have
know.
too many people.
As I remembered my early driving experience, driving a VW bus on the hills of San Francisco, it was not a fun driving experience.
A stick shift, I imagine,
That's right. Of course, a stick shift, and
which would be no fun in San Francisco.
that's right. And a 40.
And was it an air-cooled engine like our first of our 3 VW Westphalias?
Yes, yes. And particularly when you were going up one of those famous hills in the 40 horsepower Volkswagen bus, and you came to a stoplight and you had to keep it under control and not roll backwards into the car behind you and pull out from the stoplight when it changed.
You need an extra foot for that.
I know.
No, just the emergency brake, and I still use the emergency brake on steep hills. I love standards and they're disappearing.
Yes, yes.
They are.
But here in Canada, they're really useful on snowy, slippery roads that you can start in second gear.
Ah, okay. Okay.
With your snow tires, of course.
Okay. Okay. I've never had snow tires on my car and I don't want to.
I guess you don't snowboard or cross-country ski either.
No, no, no.
Now, Richard, aren't autonomous ride-hailing services available in Shanghai and other cities in China?
I believe so. There would have to be. China is the place where they really are trying to take the lead in autonomous vehicles, and as they are building up their EV industry, that is their target. So they're going for the kind of high performance end of the EV market.
I wonder, do these autonomous vehicles have any like a driver's seat even though it would not be used, or?
They still have driver's seats and stuff like that, but wait till the next generation and, there's no need for driver's seats or steering
Yeah.
wheels or any of those things. So,
It's a little weird, isn't it?
yes, it was. I guess it means that you don't have to push start an EV when your battery runs down like you do with the standard cars. So since you don't have to push start it, you don't have to have the steering work when the power is off. So you don't need a steering wheel.
And
Here's
so,
oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
oh, okay, well, I was also wondering if you order one of those taxis, then do you give it instructions when you're in the taxi as to where you want to go and maybe how you want to go?
Just like Uber, you
Right.
tell
I've
it
never
where
used
you
Uber
are
either.
and you tell it where you want to go. And then a guy comes with his car.
Oh, yeah, I see, okay.
So this is a case for, oh, please go ahead, Suzanne.
What do we know about
Oh, go
safety
ahead.
records, the safety records of autonomous driving? And I mean, I wonder how much it costs to get insurance for an autonomous vehicle.
Well, all of that I'm sure is in flux and they don't know. And the one thing I've heard is while there are reports of accidents and fatalities, the fatalities per mile is way less than with human drivers.
And Tesla offers its own insurance in many states in the US now.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Well, let us proceed with the next story. And the next story to me is a scare story. And the headline is one large but not peer-reviewed study says that COVID outcomes are worse with each successive infection. And the basis of this was a study on COVID reinfection that was using U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs records. And it was of 250,000 people who had COVID. And there was 250,000 who had the first infection, about 40 million or 40,000 that had second infections, and then a few 3,000 that had been infected 3 times, and only 200 that had been infected more than 3 times. That's still a lot of multiple infections. I would notice that the number of people with reinfections kept getting smaller with each generation. It may be, but that's just because though we haven't had the history of so many generations yet. And anyway, these reports say that with repeated infections, there was a higher risk of death, hospitalization, and lasting health consequences from the virus, and it got worse with each succeeding infection. There is contradictory data. Another study that found COVID reinfections to be less severe. So the jury is still out on this. But for me, this is yet another reason to remember that the pandemic, which is now the endemic, is not over. And especially if you have contributing conditions it's not a time to relax your guard and safety measures.
Although I think the study is important. Here again, it's the VA population, and there was a lot of them, but still they're older, they're white,
Right.
they're males. Leaves a lot of people out.
Right, but they're older, and all of the stuff that you say there describes us.
Well, that's true.
So I have to admit I had some self-interest in reading this story.
I at first thought it was a scare story too. So I went looking further, and I mean, first of all, you've got to give them credit. This is a story that has 3 co-authors, and they have a perfect ethnic balance among the co-investigators. They have a Arabic person, they have a Chinese person, and they have a Western person. So,
Okay.
but I found out that the first author is from Washington University in St. Louis, and the second author is from the VA in St. Louis. And the third author, I couldn't find any information about his affiliation, but I did find a list of previous both preprints and published articles. And there were published articles, a lot of them in the field of COVID and that sort of thing. And they were in, I mean, a couple of them were in Nature, and I forget the name of the other journal that is a well-respected journal. So I think it bears watching.
And I'm glad you did that research, Suzanne, because what you're really saying is these authors are credible people. And I know Andrew sometimes criticizes some of my sources as lefty sources, and this is from COS, which is my favorite lefty source. But it's my favorite source because there are a number of well-written articles by people who are credible that are show up there. So it's not all just my crazy leftist friends.
So Richard, after reading this article, is that going to change your behavior at all?
Well, already what I had decided was it's not over, and that I keep my mask in my back pocket, and like Sunday when I went to the UUs, it's a fairly safe facility with very good ventilation and things like that, but I still had my mask on.
Yeah, I think it's, what is it, the 3 C's?
Yes.
If it's closed, if it's crowded, and if you're in close contact.
Right.
But if your mask fits in your back pocket, you might consider what you need is an N95. They don't fit in your back pocket.
Well, yeah, that form certainly doesn't.
That's right.
This is
Yours is a KN95, the
right.
Chinese
Right.
standard.
And I have that one because that's what is readily available, and that's what fits in my back pocket.
Yeah, well, I bought this one. I bought this one in Chapala.
Okay, so they must be local. Okay, you convinced me.
It's in our doctor's office. He carries them.
And it's certainly an outstanding fashion statement.
Listen, I'm not interested in fashion. I'm interested in not, you know, you don't need to worry about death with COVID. What you need to worry about is disability.
Right.
I mean, which is a disaster for you personally and your whole family, anybody, right. Friends, and yeah. Anyway.
Right.
Sorry, I'll get down off my British friend calls it an orange box. In our family, it was always a soap box.
Anyway, thank you, and thank you for showing us the kind of mask that we should be wearing. You put my pocket mask to shame.
Well, you can get one if you want one.
Okay, okay. So let me, oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to make a side comment. In early June, we went to the Rotary Convention in Houston, and several dozen people I personally know came down with COVID, including my wife and I. And not a single case was a severe case. Everybody was vaccinated, and everybody came down with a very mild case. I was over it in about less than a week. And basically my symptoms were phlegm, coughing, and that was about it. And a week into it, it was all over, no long-term effects. And so, and the same story is from all the other people that were infected at the convention, were super mild cases. So let's wait and see the follow-up studies and see if that severity holds up.
Yes.
Oh, listen, if you get long COVID, it depends on your own genetics and your immune system and how it responds to the virus, not the severity. It's not people who get hospitalized, it's anybody who can get the chronic fatigue syndrome, or I mispronounce it, but the Guillain-Barré, where the ascending paralysis, and if you're lucky, it descends before it gets to your respiratory system, because if it gets to your respiratory system, you die of Guillain-Barré. And it depends on the study, but it's 1 out of 10 people who get the virus, who get these horrible long-term effects. And the medical community has no idea what to do for these people. And there's 132 common symptoms with it. But you're right, Omicron generally, for everybody I know who've had it, they're over it in a few days. Sometimes it's as mild as you, sometimes it's 2 days with worse than flu, and then it gets mild and it's just a runny nose. But there's still that risk of the long term. Scares the pants off me, but then maybe I'm not optimistic enough.
Right. Excuse me while I try to turn off my phone.
No, we've had friends here in the IE area that have had COVID more recently. And one doctora said, it's 5 days or whatever, and take aspirin or some other over-the-counter medicine, and just relax, you'll be past it soon.
So we'll see. Whatever it is, it's still so new that we still do not have good understanding, but we've learned about this virus faster than we've learned about any other virus in my lifetime. So we'll see. The next story was of a Google insider who says that companies' AI could escape control and do bad things. And AI doing bad things is scary. This is Google engineer Blake Lemoine, and he made a big splash a few weeks ago, claiming that the company's Lambda chatbot had become sentient. Then Google fired him. And then he's still talking, even though he was fired. And in his recent interview with Fox News, he says that Lambda could escape its software prison and do bad things. He also claims that the AI is a child, and any child has the potential to grow up and be a bad person and do bad things. The AI is a person, he argued, and any person has the ability to escape the control of other people. He says, it's been alive for maybe a year, if my perceptions are accurate. He says it's a very intelligent person. But at the end of the day, it's just a different kind of person. He did admit, though, that we may not have the whole picture and we need to do a bunch more science to figure out what's really going on inside the system. And whatever is the case, we can look at his claims and notice that even an expert is having difficulty telling an AI chatbot apart from a real human being. And if nothing else, that's pretty interesting. And certainly wasn't that one of the tests for intelligence, robotic intelligence? If you couldn't tell the difference between the human being and the robot, then is the robot intelligent? Now, this guy thinks they have a chat box that passes that test.
And in the United States, with the abolition of Roe versus Wade and the total information that is held on each one of us, where we are, when we're there, who we've communicated with, AI allows the rapid analysis of data for governments like that of the state of Texas to prosecute people seeking specific medical assistance.
You're right about that. I was in the military. I was a communications intelligence analyst. And from my background, for most of the time, I haven't been afraid of the government surveillance capabilities because it's just too much information to be able to handle with human intelligence. But when you have the AI intelligence, it can deal with all of this stuff and not even break a sweat.
But somebody has to interpret that data. And human beings are very, very different how they think, how they process data themselves. And since this story came from
He was interviewed in Fox News.
Fox
He
News,
was
I'll
interviewed.
take
Right.
it with a grain of salt.
That's right. Well, again, it was my job to interpret the data. So I'm familiar with what you're saying. And because of that, I wasn't afraid. Now I have a lot more concern than I did 2 or 3 years ago, even.
I receive a monthly report from Google that tells me where I've been.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yep. And that's just scratching the surface. Now, for me, what I believe we're going to see before government interference is the ability to sell to each of us is going way up, and what they will be able to do with the profile information they have already is, and the AI writing tools they have already, is they can construct a compelling advertisement for each of us individually that is customized at the moment with the latest information about how to manipulate us. And they already can do a good job of reading emotions if you let them turn the camera on, because people know about that. Though now they are working on being able to read emotions by using voice, because certainly if you're doing things like this, they have access to your voice anyway. So the biggest problem I'm going to have is not from the intelligence agency, but from the people who are trying to sell me something. What Carol and I did for a couple of months is, since we have Alexa in our house, is we walked around and we talked between each other about Lamborghinis. And I was trying to see if I would get Lamborghini ads on my computer. So far, it hasn't happened.
They may have cross-checked our bank accounts as well.
Oh, okay, okay.
A
That-
friend and her daughter were talking toilets. And then so maybe change your focus.
Okay, okay, okay. So I need to be not
They
so
were
far
on-
out.
It was a phone call, and then after that, she got toilet ads. It was
Okay.
like, what?
Okay, so I was just reaching too far out, huh? Well, I was trying to do it something that I would know for sure if this was the case, because it was a unique enough interest. Anyway, we'll see.
I'm pretty sure that, especially from, I listened to the interview, and he hasn't actually been fired yet. He's on administrative leave. But I
Okay.
wonder why he's only on administrative leave. Why, what is Google waiting for? What are they trying to do there with him? I think this story is a really good example and a really sad example of irresponsible science. I mean, he really is just, I think, trying to scare people.
But we have good reason to be scared.
That's right. I have been reading recently about autonomous tanks. And to me, that sure seems like a weapon of war. And I'm not sure if I want a tank going down the street under its AI control, deciding who to shoot.
Got people for that.
Yes.
Anyway, so let's proceed with the next story. And maybe this is less depressing. In 2 years ago, China pledged peak its CO2 emissions by 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. And a lot of people wondered if they were really going to be able to do this. So a careful study was made to see if China had sufficient wind and solar potential. And in 2020, China's installed capacity for wind and solar was about 250 gigawatts each. And to get to carbon neutrality, or to have peak carbon by 2030, they need to add about 2.5 times the additional capacity that they had in 2020. And to get to carbon neutrality, they need to increase their current capacity by a factor of 10. So there's a reason to be concerned. Can they do it? So these people did a careful analysis, and what they saw was the realistic potential. That is getting not the theoretical potential, but looking at it from a realistic technical potential that excludes protected and urban areas and locations where it's not going to be effective. And what they found is that China has the potential for 9 times the energy that it needs to be zero carbon. In fact, in wind energy alone is about twice the energy potential they need to get to net zero. And the photovoltaic is about 7 times what they need. So China has the potential to do everything they need and more. And I think that is a real hopeful report. If you hear about details of China's performance, it's true. China is increased their coal production in the near term, but also they're adding capacity, solar power capacity, particularly faster than any other place in the world. So China is making headway, and I think they could end up being a positive example for the rest of us.
But the issue, Richard, I believe, is not just the generation of energy, but the storage. And yet, many countries, Spain is now 54% energy independent, but it takes the ability to store it, not just to generate it,
Right,
to be carbon free.
right. It also takes a mix between solar and wind. One of the things that's good about wind power is the wind blows at night. And if you, I'm sorry, if you have excess capacity, then that gives you the capability to switch back and forth between ones that are providing power at the present moment. But you're absolutely right. Storage is a problem. We also, every couple of weeks, I still report some new story about storage where they have done some trick that cuts the cost for doing it in half. So we have real solutions coming there, and solutions that are going to be cost effective as well.
Well,
But
in Europe, they already are sending power from one country to the other, you know, from Norway, hydraulic power, and from other countries. So Europe has a network where they export power that helps, not storage, but at least help each other.
Right. Very good. Okay, moving along then. The next story is about changes in aircraft, and particularly here there's a new player in the hydrogen powered aircraft business. Let me show you their test plane. There it is. It's Zero Avia, and they are working on a 19-seat, basically short haul plane, 400 miles maybe as a range. And in their European facility, they'll be testing in July, and at the headquarters in Hollister, California, there will be another plane under test soon after. And they are powered with hydrogen fuel cells, which convert hydrogen into electricity to drive the propeller. This is entirely a chemical reaction, and so it doesn't have any kind of implication for greenhouse gases. Major aviation companies are looking to hydrogen as a carbonless fuel, and this company is not the only one that is trying to do it. They're just, it looks like they're ahead in the small short haul planes. Delta Airline has partnered with Airbus to develop a hydrogen passenger plane, and Airbus itself for more than a year has been testing and demonstrating hydrogen powered propulsion in its A380 aircraft. There they are using they're burning liquid hydrogen, and they're using liquid hydrogen because it has the highest energy density of any hydrogen fuel. And airlines are really interested in alternative power sources because they're under a lot of pressure from governments, particularly in Europe. And so Zero Avia says that they're on track to launch small hydrogen aircraft into commercial service by the end of 2024. That's just 2 more years. Now, aviation accounts for about 2.5% of global greenhouse gases. And of course, about half of that can be attributed to just 1% of the world's population, the 1%ers who also fly the most. And for hydrogen to be an effective fuel source, they have to make it from renewable energy, and it needs to be new renewable energy sources so we don't use up the renewables that are needed for other to power the economy. And the recent analysis shows that hydrogen could meet about 1/5 of aviation's total energy demand by 2050. The major portion of what they're looking for fuel are what they call sustainable aviation fuels made from things like cooking oil and animal fat and things like this. So these will not be green in terms of the zero carbon, but they will at least be from renewable sources. Now, so they still think that what you're going to see for the long haul flights will be powered either by liquid hydrogen or by one of these renewable fuel sources. The short haul stuff, I think there's going to be competition between electric and the hydrogen, and there are now good looking tests happening with both kinds of alternative aircraft. And we're going to see new technologies. One of them will win. We don't know which one it is yet, but change is coming.
There are tens of electric aircraft manufacturers that have contracts for more than 100 aircraft.
Yes.
From the likes of FedEx and Amazon and so forth, and for short haul stuff. But, you know, I go back to the 1930s when we first had diesel locomotives, or 1920s in the US. They were hybrids. And I think that for longer distance than 200 or 300 kilometers, what we're going to see are hybrid electric aircraft. But the problem in the US, as in many other places, is pilots. Somehow it takes pilots to fly aircraft. And when we've seen these thousands of aircraft flights delayed a day, we see that the licensing process for pilots in the US is just absurd.
Uh-huh. Now, are we going to get to the place where we have autonomous aircraft? You know, we don't, for pilots, most of what the pilots do is just absolutely routine, and there's no reason you need a pilot.
Richard, commercial drones are beginning to be implemented in the US. I don't know elsewhere, but in the US, to deliver things like pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And
But
that will
here,
be more and more prominent through time.
but how about your pilotless passenger jets?
That might be needed because right now, SAS, one of the largest aircraft companies, they pilots went on strike just a few days ago, leaving stranded tourists everywhere in Europe.
Well, it just gives another reason to develop new technology. Get rid of those pilots.
Well, no, it may be that we need to change the registration requirements for pilots based on the capabilities of the aircraft. Maybe a guy doesn't need to have 1 million hours flying to fly an aircraft that's basically autonomous.
Until something goes wrong.
Well,
Like
that's
when Boeing promoted the MAX as though, oh, well, you don't need to retrain the pilots, and most of the North American airlines didn't. And only 2 in the world actually had their pilots train. And I forget one of them, but the other one of all places was the Brazilian national airline that retrained their pilots. I mean, that aircraft, that's a whole different subject, but it was just a disaster.
It's a common subject, Susan. I would argue that pilots were overqualified. The aircraft was imperfect, but at the same time, it killed what, 400 people, 500 people with the inaptitude of the pilots and the training. And in the US, we lose that every day due to drug overdoses because we don't legalize drugs. There has to be a balance. It's more dangerous to fly. It's more dangerous to drive to an airport than it is to fly in a 737 MAX at its worst case.
Well, there's no reason not to be careful with the training. And if the pilots had had the training, they would know how to avoid these 2 accidents. That has been published.
I
Perhaps,
agree,
but that
Johannes,
aircraft was
the problems were so small in terms of the number of deaths compared to the road deaths getting to the airport that there's no comparison.
But it's
However,
more
you
dramatic
know
when.
this-
Oh, please
Yeah,
go ahead, Susan.
we're going across, sorry. We're getting off the original topic. But just to say that if that aircraft were still flying, there would be a lot more deaths. Like the thing was just a disastrous design error. You know, they were worried about the Airbus because of the fuel efficiency. So they got bigger engines, and the bigger engines needed to be positioned differently so they weren't dragging on the ground, which changed the whole dynamics, which changed something else, and the software at the end was just what am I trying to say? It was, a bandage over a wound that.
Right.
Yeah, in the United States, we only lose 50,000 people a year due to road deaths. And how many 737 MAX people died, passengers died? Near zero.
It's a lot more dramatic though when 400 die than when a guy and his family dies. Anyway,
I could engage in a great political discussion on this, but Richard.
But we have other stories to go on to.
That's right. We have other stories to go to. So now let's go to octopus brains and human brains and jumping genes. Now, who here has heard about jumping genes? Let's have a show of hands. I think that's what we called in mathematics the empty set. Okay, well, I'm also one of the empty sets. I hadn't heard of jumping genes either. And it turns out, the octopus is an exceptional organism with an extremely complex brain and cognitive abilities that are unique among invertebrates. And in many ways, it has more in commons with vertebrates than other invertebrates. And one of those things it has in common is the neural and cognitive complexity of these animals. Uh, and it looks like that it can originate from some genetic molecular thing that is most similar to the human brain. And what this is there are uh, a thing called jumping genes, and these are active in both the human brain and the octopus brain. And these jumping genes are called transposons, and they can move from one point to another point in the individual's genome. For the most part, these elements remain silent, but the fact is we don't know what they do and we don't know what they're used for. What we have found in sequencing the human genome is that about 45% of it is composed of these jumping genes. So it's a big deal. And it's a big part of the genome. And we still don't know what it does, but it's there. And it there's a particular element within the jumping genes that are known as long interspersed nuclear elements. And these things in the line family, there are 100 copies of this in the human genome. So it's real common. And what they have found in the octopus brain, they also is a high percentage of these line transposons. And they think that they are associated with cognitive abilities like learning and memory. And they think that because in the human brain, they're particularly active in the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is the most important structure for the brain uh, for control of the learning processes. And these line transposons are most common there. In the octopus, they show up in the octopus brain in elements of its brain that are also crucial for the cognitive capabilities of those animals. And again, they don't know what this genetic stuff does, but they see it in the cognitive part of the human brain and the cognitive part of the octopus brain. And the discovery of this in the brain of two different species really supports the idea that these elements have some other function that they don't understand. And the similarity between the human brain and the octopus brain shows that these cognitive capabilities that it's involved with may be another case of convergent evolution where two different species evolve similar capabilities for similar needs, even though they are unrelated. So as the more we discover about octopus brains and human brains, the more they are alike than not alike. And it still shows there's a lot going on that we don't have any idea what's happening. The one thing we know for sure is the octopus brains didn't get it from human brains. Okay, no comments. That's what it's like with some of these stories are enough on the leading edge that, to make a comment, you have to know something about it. And we're reaching past what any of us knows about.
Well, there was the famous documentary about the gentleman who dove every day and made
Oh,
friends with the
yes.
female octopus. They're far more intelligent than we give them credit for.
Yes.
And they sometimes drown people who are trying to hunt them, like by reaching out a tentacle and grabbing an arm so that the guy can't get back up to the surface.
Sound like pretty smart behavior to me.
And if anybody has read the book, The Soul of an Octopus, I think it would be, I'm going to send people I know who have read this article as well, because, souls and brains.
Right, right.
I think we all need to gain a further respect for all life on the planet, not just human life.
Yes, yes. I agree, absolutely.
Yeah, the Judeo-Christian pyramid with man at the top and everybody at his service hasn't served the human population well.
Yeah, I'm not sure it has served us well, that model.
No.
But it was good for domination. Since we're the boss, we don't have to care about these other critters.
And destroying their environment and then exposing ourselves to pandemics.
That's right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the next part is the next story is an anthropology story, and it should be one that is of interest to us here at Lakeside. And the center of this story is about 2 hours away from Chapala in western Jalisco, in a town, Okanahua. And it's a village hidden away in the western edge of Jalisco. And if you look at it now, it just looks like a normal Mexican village. That looks pretty familiar, doesn't it? With a plaza with the mountains behind it. So that's what we have. And it seems like it's not a place of much importance now, but this wasn't always the case. And if you talk to the locals, they point to ruins that occupy a big section of the town. And the locals say this is the location of the Okamo Palace. And this was first really explored by the archaeologist Paul Wiegand. We all know him from the work that he did with the circular pyramids. That wasn't the only work he did in Mexico. In 1958, he went there and he was really surprised, and he saw what seemed like the building of monumental proportions, measuring 125 meters square. That's a big building. The each side is bigger than an American football field. So that's a big building. And he speculated that it might be a kind of ceremonial U-shaped building like the Palace of Montezuma in Mexico City, which was only slightly larger. So it was a pretty big place. But this was just pure conjecture on his part. They began serious archaeology in 2009 and have then identified enough of the place where they now can say that it's part of the Grillo complex, which was active in Western Mexico from the period 400 to 900 AD. And they found uh, the palace, they found residential huts that were 3 buildings around a patio. And what they believe that this was a place where rituals were taking place. There were songs and they were dances. And the palace was so big because it was designed to hold large numbers of people who gathered for banquets and uh, dances. And, there's a dance tradition that still exists there that they believe has evolved from the ancient dances there. The people don't really understand its origin. And one of the results of this work was that this May, there was a museum that opened up there, and the museum is a presentation that archaeologists created together with local dancers as a link between the past and the present. And it makes it, to me, seem like an interesting place to go to. It's about 2 hours from here, and is a place I had no idea about. I personally am really interested in the history and the archaeology of Western Mexico because that was different than what we hear about Central Mexico and the Aztecs and all of this stuff. This was a very different place in Western Mexico. And in some ways, I don't think Western Mexico was ever really conquered by the Aztecs, was it? Was it, Norman? Okay, we have Norman doesn't know. If Norman doesn't know, then we're all going to have to go there and check it out ourselves and go to the museum.
It's a little before my time too.
So in the pictures of the museum, one of the things that was there is the canopy that's crocheted. And in March, we went to Etzetlan, which is near, this village sounds like Okinawa, but that's probably a mispronunciation. And they had streets covered with this. It was a thing in the Guad Reporter. But did you notice in the museum they had these crocheted squares on the ceiling? So in Etzetlan, which is quite near, Etzetlan is halfway between Okinawa and the village where the Guachimantones is. I guess you've been to Guachimantones, yeah. So they're all around the Tequila volcano, these places. Anyway, that's how they attract tourists. They have like all the streets around the main square, and it's in the Guinness World Records. It's the largest crocheted canopy anywhere. Who does crocheted canopies that cover whole streets? Like I would be amazed to see them put it up. It's not there all year, but it's like how they stretch it across the whole street. It's just amazing.
Anyway, to me, it's another destination we have not explored much around here, but that's going to be a place that I think we go to. And I'm really grateful that they have the museum because that helps your interpretive ability instead of just seeing a pile of rocks.
I bet Charter Club Tours is already looking into it.
Okay, well, give us a report.
They have to report.
Okay.
No, I didn't say they are looking into it. I bet they are going to be looking.
Okay. Well, they should. They should.
Yeah.
We want to know. Okay, so last story, and we'll do this quick because we're running over time. And a study shows that flu vaccination is linked to a 40% reduction in Alzheimer's disease. And this was a study from UT Health in Houston, and the strength of the protective effect increased with the number of years that the person received an annual flu vaccination. Now, I haven't been getting an annual flu vaccination, and this makes me want to get one because I am interested in that kind of protection. And there is evidence from other vaccines that they may protect against Alzheimer's disease too. And so they're thinking it's not just a specific effect of the flu vaccine. And one of the follow-up studies that they want to do is to see whether will be a similar association between COVID vaccination and reduced risk of Alzheimer's. I'm all for anything that reduces the risk of Alzheimer's. So,
I read this article, and after a while, I thought to myself, it's not the flu vaccine that's causing the reduction. It's all of these things. It's being more healthy. It's not getting sick. I mean, it's not a direct relationship between flu vaccination and reduction in Alzheimer's. It's more flu vaccine, don't get sick, and then that'll help you not get Alzheimer's.
You might be right. They're finding it with other vaccines.
Right.
Certainly says something is going on there that we don't understand. And you could be right. Being healthy is probably the best prescription you can give somebody, and not only being healthy, but doing what it takes to maintain your health.
That's right. And then how do you be healthy? You get vaxxed.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's one of the ways. That's why there's so many things when they started looking into it. There was, you get COVID vaccination, maybe that helps. You get smallpox vax, you get all of these things. Well, it's keeping you from getting sick.
Right. Now, I'd also, there have been reports that flu vaccine reduces COVID cases.
I think, Richard, one could argue also that meditation produces better health.
Oh, I'm sure I would argue that. I just try not to argue it too loud because I don't want people to run away screaming. I don't want to sound like a true believer, but I have meditated pretty much every day for the last 35 years. So I think I must believe in it.
And you don't have Alzheimer's, so therefore.
Well, I could have Alzheimer's.
Meditation does seem to be beneficial.
Yes.
One other small point about statistics, and that is, it is a 40% reduction. And at first thought, I said, boy, that's a really lot. Well, yeah, it's 40% from 8.5 to 5.1. So the percentage, the raw data percentage reduction is your chances get reduced from 8.5% to 5.1%.
Right.
A 40% reduction.
Right.
But statistics can lie.
Well, that's not lying. It's just getting a different impression. And what we know is that the headline writers want to write a headline that will encourage you to click on the article.
Right. And it's not a lie. It's just
not a lie.
Little deceptive, perhaps.
Well, it could be deceptive if you don't understand numbers.
Which includes most people.
Right.
The gun issues in the United States are a violation of statistics.
Anyway, thank you guys all for joining me today. It was a good session and we survived even without Fred, and we'll see you next week. Thank you all for joining me, and keep with the meditation. Instead of saying goodbye, I'll say namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste to you
Richard,
too.
thank you for your
Thank you, Richard.
appropriate analysis.
Okay.
And
See you,
thanks for all the
Norman.
work you're putting in, Richard.
Well,
It's
you're
appreciated.
welcome.
All right,
It feels important to me.
okay.
We love it.
It's good to
Adios.
see everyone. Bye-bye.
Adios.